of pressing the right buttons to engage him, I think dangling a state visit in front of a half-Scottish president of the United States, whose mother has an immense attachment to the country, was a very successful use of the kind of soft power that the United Kingdom has. But as well as securing the undertaking around NATO, let's understand the checks and balances that this president will have to operate under. First of all, he is going to need to operate under the checks and balances that come from the Congress, and the Republican caucus in the Congress is going to be immensely important in that. And for our Prime Minister to have secured a place where she has an opportunity then to be, in effect, putting our case, which might also be aligned with the case of the State Department, the Pentagon, and the CIA into the White House, if the right honourable gentleman is brief, because this is out of injury time.
Continues to seriously underrate President Trump. The idea that this president is going to have things determined by anything other than his own interest and what he perceives the American interest to be is a mistake of such naivety that explains the fact that he managed to get into the White House in the first place.
Crispin Blunt.
Well, I would draw the right honourable attentions to the fact of what is actually happening as this president who is come from an area where he's not being disciplined in the requirements of our profession or the service profession, who is then issuing these undisciplined statements. What has he had to say about torture? That he will concede his judgment to that of his defence secretary. I was cheerfully told by LGBT friends of mine that he was about to rescind the employment protection for LGBT people in the United States. He didn't, as it happened. We've then seen what's happened in the row between his national security advisor and his vice president. Who won out? His vice president. And then if one looks at the immigration terms of the immigration ban, that is being overturned by another element of the separation of powers in the United States by the judges. So we are seeing the development of this administration with this, of course, this extraordinary, unprecedented election of this individual to the presidency. I won't, if the Honourable will forgive me, because I think I'm now out of injury time. But the point I'm making is this is early days. We are beginning to see the necessity for a disciplined administration begin to crowd in on this president, and we will see how this develops. But it is incredibly important that our Prime Minister has secured the first voice into the White House of a foreign leader. Now, the truth is, we need to calm this debate, and we need to take the hype out of it. And I don't just mean the debate in this chamber, but frankly the national debate. The invitation has been issued. I don't think it should or could be properly rescinded. And so there is the possibility that the invitation will be taken up in the course of this year. I think that would be a mistake. I think we need to point out that in 2020, we are going to have the 400th anniversary of one of the most remarkable events in British American history, which is the Pilgrim Fathers. Incredibly important in the United States, and it would be an utterly appropriate moment to be marked by a state visit to the United Kingdom by whoever is the head of the American state at the time. And so I think we should focus the administration's attention on that opportunity. A head of government visit this year would be entirely appropriate, because if we don't take the hype and out of this debate with all the people who signed this petition, there is every possibility that, of course, this visit is then going to become a rallying point for everybody who is unhappy with the direction both of American policy or British policy or anything else, and we will then be left with the poor old commissioner of the Met is going to be left with a rather significant public order issue to manage. And so I think there is an opportunity to look forward, to celebrate a great anniversary in British-American relations and extract ourselves from the practical difficulty of this invitation having been issued. But if you're asking me, if it was the issuing of that invitation that secured a reaffirmation of the special relationship, a commitment by the President of the United States to NATO, reinforced by senior members of his administration in Europe this weekend, and an opportunity for us to reinforce the voices into the White House from the State Department, from the Republican caucus, from the Pentagon and the CIA, that was infinitely the right thing to do.
A number of colleagues who've already spoken are intervening. I know this is a debate, but if they desist from intervening, we might get everyone in from their own parties as well. Kirsten Oswald.
Mr Walker, it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I am pleased to be able to speak today on behalf of the thousands of my constituents who signed the petition objecting to Donald Trump being invited to the UK for a state visit, as well as the large number who contacted me saying they didn't wish to sign that particular petition, but they strongly objected to a state visit taking place. And many of those who contacted me said they'd never signed a petition before, but they felt so strongly that this was wrong that they had done so now. And no wonder they were concerned. What on earth have we come to that the UK government should for 1 second think that it was appropriate to reward the disgraceful statements and actions of President Trump with a state visit? A state visit with all the pomp and ceremony and fantushery of the British establishment. It is hugely depressing to hear those on the Conservative benches who support the state visit yet again today telling us that it's important we engage with President Trump because America is our friend. And so it is. But that's why we should challenge this. President Trump's administration so far has been characterised by ignorance and prejudice, seeking to ban Muslims and deny refuge to people fleeing from war and persecution, because that is what he said and that is what he has done, and it is simply racism. But the Prime Minister has decided that she'll take any friend she can get for her hard Tory Brexit, and to hang with the refugees, to hang with the Muslims, to hang with anyone who's different, to hang with our EU nationals, to hang with women, Mexicans, to hang with people fleeing war and terror, because that is what this plan for a state visit says. And let's not kid ourselves. This UK government, with its ever-reducing plans to help child refugees, has knowingly and deliberately couried into this Islamophobic, misogynistic, dangerously confused, if events in Sweden are anything to go by, leader of the free world. Instead, as one of my constituents said to me, of having the balls to stand up and show some kind of moral backbone. President Trump's words and actions are horribly destructive for Muslims across the world. They absolutely will foster Islamophobia and racism. And we have all heard about the nasty, insidious, creeping racism that has felt able to raise its ugly head. Hate crime incidents up 41% in England and Wales since the Brexit vote. And this state visit ramps that up further, giving all those who feel the need to persecute other people the comfort they need, especially as they may now feel that it's rubber-stamped by this rudderless shambles of a UK government. On these benches, we have grave concerns about the effect this has on people living, working and studying in Scotland. And many Muslims are understandably upset and fearful. And other groups too are upset and fearful. As the mother of mixed-race children, I am upset and fearful for the future in a way that I have never been before. Because this is a time of flux and uncertainty. And there are dark clouds gathering in many parts of the world. Our job here should be to shine a light, to stand tall. We should be taking the moral high ground and sending a firm message to President Trump that this will never be acceptable and he needs to stop. But instead, this UK government has rolled over to have its belly tickled. And shame on all of you involved if you don't rescind this invitation for a state visit now. This will never be in our name.
Edward Lee.
There are two ways you can approach this debate if you agree this state visit should go ahead. You can argue along the lines of national self-interest, which is the relatively easy way, and there's a more difficult way that you've got to seek to understand what Mr. Trump means to many people in America. So I'll start with the first. It seems obvious to me that great countries like our own act in their own national self-interest, and they issue these invitations in order to further that self-interest. Presumably, when we invited not one, but two presidents of China, we were prepared to overlook the fact that this is effectively, in China, a police state. There's no freedom of expression, of movement, of association. There's outright religious persecution. In every single respect, It is a state which doesn't share our values in any shape or form. Presumably when we issued the invitation all those years ago to President Ceausescu and awarded him a knighthood, we felt it was in our interest so to do, our national self-interests. Indeed, we only rescinded the award of the knighthood on the day before he was executed by his own people. Presumably, well, of course, I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I think the honourable member making a valid point, which is that there's not a great deal of consistency about the way in which we offer these state visits, or for that matter, the content of them. I think it was particularly useful when we offered one to the President of Colombia, because I think that helped progress the peace process in Colombia. But I just wonder whether he wouldn't support the idea of the Foreign Affairs Committee and the Procedure Committee doing a proper review of state visits so that we get this right for the future.
That's a perfectly valid point, and I have no objection to that point of view. And just to continue the historical analogies, presumably when we invited President Mugabe, a racist homophobe, to have tea with the Queen, we were prepared to overlook his transgressions as well. And when we invited King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia, who presides over the ultimate misogynist state, we presumably felt that Saudi Arabia was an important ally of our own. So we just got to be careful what we wish for in this debate. Just think for a moment. If we did listen to this petition, which people have signed in perfectly good faith, I accept that. It's a perfectly reasonable point of view. But if we were to accept it, if we were to, as a result of this debate, rescind this invitation, it would be catastrophic to our relationship with what is our closest ally. And I won't labour that point. But my honourable friend for New Forest has surely won this argument in that sense, that our whole peace and security, the whole peace and security of the Western world does depend on us using influence with President Trump. And I, for one, believe that the visit of the Prime Minister, our Prime Minister, was an absolute triumph. Yeah. An absolute triumph, in not only in furthering our national self-interest, but by binding President Trump and his new administration into NATO. And we are seeing the effects of that only this week in terms of what the Vice President has been saying. So I think that there's no doubt in my mind that it is in our national self-interest to accord respect and honour to our closest and our greatest ally. And whether we like it or not, this man is the duly elected, democratically elected leader of the free world. To me, that is the easy argument to make. But I feel that I've got to follow my honourable friend from Lancashire in making what is probably a much more difficult and controversial argument. We had a debate a year ago on Mr. Trump, and speaker after speaker condemned him, said he was outrageous. Even people from my own side. I think I was the only one who tried to understand this phenomenon and why people are supporting him and voting for him. And I made the point then, and I make it now, that I think it's very unwise of us to try and transfer our own views, our own prejudices, our own viewpoint to the other side of the Atlantic. I mean, most people here, for instance, think that I am on the far right of this political spectrum in this House. But here I am, a person who warmly supports gun control, who opposed the Iraq War, who relies entirely on the NHS. All these things would make me just an abomination in large parts of the Republican Party. So it's very foolish for us to lecture our Conservative colleagues on the other side of the Atlantic about what is the right or the improper nature of conservatism. Mr. Trump is not my sort of conservative. I really have nothing in common with him. But I will say that let's look at some of his comments. The charge of misogyny. I mean, of course, what he said, what he was reported to say in a private conversation is absolutely horrible and ridiculous, and I hope none of us would make it. But which one of us has not made some ridiculous sexual comment sometime in our past? Well, in private, let he who is without sin cast the first stone, all right? He's apologised. That's not really a reason to withdraw and implement. Well, I better give way because somebody is casting an intervention.
I thank the Chair for letting me give way. I cast no aspersions, but is he seriously suggesting that it is a legitimate perspective and point of view that the comments made in public by Trump on a number of issues, including marriage equality for LGBT people, and in private, which were recorded and then broadcast on sexual abuse and attacking women, are a legitimate position, and he stands there and thinks it's acceptable to say in this chamber and say in this House that kind of position is acceptable?
I said actually precisely the opposite. As far as I know, I've never spoken like that. No friends of mine have ever spoken like that. I completely deplore it and find it ridiculous to speak like that in private. All I'm saying is that most of us would actually be rather embarrassed if everything we'd ever said in private, in our past, was ever... I've given away twice. I think I better get on now. I knew this would be a difficult argument. It's easy to dodge it, but I think it's only fair that you have to make it. As regards this argument of racism, the fact is that I don't believe there's any proof that actually this travel ban is racist. Indonesia is the largest Muslim country in the world. There is no question of a travel ban on Indonesia. All these countries are riven by civil war. This travel ban builds on work done by President Obama. So to accuse the new President of the United States of racism, misogyny, and all the rest, I think is overstated. I knew these arguments would be difficult to make, but the fact is that there are 61 million American people who actually voted for Mr. Trump and support him, whether you like it or not, whether he fills you with complete rage. The fact is, he is there. He is the duly elected President of the United States. Our interests rely absolutely on trying to influence this man, to bring him over here, to tie him to our point of view. He would never get elected in this country. His views would have no traction in this country. He would never become the leader of the Conservative Party in this country. None of us would campaign along the lines that he has campaigned on. All of us disagree fundamentally with so many things that he has said. But he is there. He is elected. We have to work with him, and that is why it would be a disaster if this invitation was rescinded.
Yeah. Well done. Very courageous.
It won't come as a surprise to members of this House that I'll be speaking against the state visit for Donald Trump. And last night, when I was thinking about this debate, I started to think about how I was Donald Trump's worst nightmare. The daughter of a political asylum seeker, raised in a Muslim household, and maybe, worst of all, a woman with strong opinions. Somehow, I don't think I'll be on his Christmas card list this year. But joking aside, I recognise that he has been elected in the United States. I recognise that this debate has come off the back of an independent election. But this debate is about the nature of the government's response, our government's response to Donald Trump, and about whether we give him a royal welcome to our country, an individual who has already made thousands of British people in this country, including members of our own House, question whether they are still welcome in America. And I have two main reasons for talking against the state visit being granted to Donald Trump. The first is, what has he actually said and done? And what has he said to the Prime Minister of our country to warrant this state visit? Because in my opinion, a state visit should be granted, not expected. And the Honourable Member for Newport West has already made the point about how this does not happen because you've been in position for 7 days. Barack Obama waited 2.5 years before he was invited on a state visit. George W. Bush waited 3 years before he was invited on a state visit. Nixon and also George Bush Sr. were never given a state visit at all. My question is about what he's actually done, because in my opinion, all he's done since he's been president is, number one, insulted the press, number two, championed economic protectionism, and number three, he's tried to ban Muslims from entering the United States. Are these reasons why we should be granting him a state visit to our country? And secondly, a state visit is meant to be something which is celebrated, a celebratory event for people. Look at the millions of people who've signed a petition saying they do not want to give Donald Trump a state visit. Look at the thousands of people who marched along Whitehall and across the country saying they did not welcome Donald Trump on a state visit to this country. Listen carefully and you'll hear the thousands of people outside right now in this house, outside this house, saying they do not want Donald Trump to be coming into this country on a royal state visit. We have a duty to listen to these people, to give them a voice. And if people from the Trump administration are listening, this is not fake news. The people who are protesting outside, these are not alternative facts. These are real protests from British people who do not want to give him a royal visit. And I disagree with the member from Chelmsford who has said that this is not about timing. Well, actually, for me, it is about timing. In the post-Brexit era, there are deep divisions within our community. We have a duty now to heal these divisions, not to invite figures like Donald Trump so he can cause more divisions within our community at a time when we are trying to figure out whether the immigration status of British nationals is secure in European countries, at a time when we're trying to figure out whether European nationals who've lived here for years and years can still stay here. We should not be inviting someone whose immigration measures are so divisive and so contradictory because it sends the wrong message to the rest of the world. And I would ask honourable members opposite, in all good conscience, can you really lay out the red carpet for someone who has talked about grabbing women by the pussy? Can you really lay out the red carpet for someone who's insulted the LGBT community, branded Mexicans as rapists and murderers, insulted Jewish people, insulted disabled people? Is that what we really want to do? And I don't have much time, so I'll just end on a final point. We will be judged. We will be judged by future generations about what we do when we pay a visit to Donald Trump and tell him to come here, because we as British people, we value respect, we value tolerance, we have mutual respect for each other. If we don't speak up in the face of injustice, if we don't challenge bigotry, then we are not serving ourselves, and we should not be inviting him to preach hatred and to spread his bigotry, his misogyny, and his division.
Order,
within
Mr.
our
Martin
community.
Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. Clearly, this is an issue that has resulted in some extremely passionate speeches on both sides of the argument. Many of my constituents will have signed the petition. Some will have signed the petition in favour of Mr. Trump coming. I have to say that only around 30 of them have actually taken the trouble to email me with their views. And I think it's perfectly legitimate that those individuals have signed a petition expressing their own personal individual views. But for a government to support one of those petitions would, I think, particularly the one in favour of banning the President, would be irresponsible and self-indulgent. The government must separate the individual from the office holder and act, as has been said by many of my colleagues, in the British national interest. And there is no doubt that our relationship with the United States is essential in terms of both the economy and security. And if a state visit will enhance and strengthen those ties, then I think that's something that we should support. I think those who have sort of been critical of the legitimacy of the President, and I think it was the Honourable Lady from Bradford West who spoke about legitimacy, and I recognise the passion with which and deep feeling with which she spoke, but actually the President is legitimate. He is democratically elected by the American people. And for us to turn our back on the office holder of President is actually an insult to the many millions of people, certainly.
Thank the honourable member for giving way on that point. Would he agree with me that actually this debate is not about legitimate, there is nobody saying let's not invite President Trump to the UK. What we're saying is let's not roll out the red carpet and honour his rhetoric.
Well, I think we should roll out the red carpet if it's in our own national interest to do so. And I don't think, as I've said, that there is any doubt about that. As my honourable friend, who's not now in his place, the member for Ribble Valley, spoke earlier about comparisons with the Brexit vote, which is perfectly the case. the reality is that other candidates in the USA, just as in those who campaigned for the Remain vote, did not understand the deeply held views of the British people. And many of the sort of sneering, arrogant, superior comments that we hear now from commentators, and it has to be said from some politicians, is actually an insult not to the British people and, in this case, to the American people. The United States is a fully functioning democracy. It's got checks and balances in the system. We've seen that with the instance of the court decision against the president's immigration ban. The Right Honourable Member from Gordon spoke about shared values, and those are the important shared values that we should be uniting and strengthening: the democratic process, the judicial system, and a free press. Foolishly, last year, as I think it was the Honourable Member from Gainsborough mentioned, we had a debate in this chamber about whether or not to ban candidate Trump. I think that was foolish and ill-advised. On this occasion, it's even more foolish and ill-advised. He is, I repeat, the democratically elected president of our most important ally. Reference has been made to meeting Her Majesty the Queen. Her Majesty has met, as the Honourable Member from Newport West described them, as some unsavoury characters. Not only has she met some unsavoury characters, she has met some characters who have actually taken up arms against the Crown. And, but she has moved on from that in the best interests of our nation. Mr. Trump has said some unusual things, irregular things, and some things I would certainly not agree with. And he has made those comments. But he has not, as many world leaders who Her Majesty and the government has met over the years, abused human rights. He's now in a position, one hopes, to actually prevent those other leaders throughout the world who seek to do that. So there is absolutely no doubt in my judgment, Mr. Turner, that we should indeed roll out the carpet for the president. We are not rolling out the carpet for Mr. Trump. We are rolling out the red carpet for our most valued ally.
Very good. I'm sorry that the Right Honourable Member for New Forest East is not in his place, because I thought I would like to respond to the arguments he made, particularly about the post-Second World War situation and the need for peace and stability. On the 4th of September 1959, as a wee boy, I walked with my mother from Maybole to Culzean Castle in Ayrshire. I did so on that autumn's day to be there to view the coming of the then President of the United States, Eisenhower, to the visit to Culzean Castle. He was well known to people of that small town in Maybole. He had been made a freeman in 1946. He had also been given by the people of Scotland a suite of rooms in Culzean Castle called the Eisenhower Suite. He was, as many of you will know, a five-star general who served as a supreme commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force in Europe. And post-World War, he was to become the first ever Supreme Commander of NATO. He was then President of the United States from 1953 to 1961, at a time when the Cold War was gripping people with a fear that we faced the possibility of a Third World War. And he famously called Culzean Castle his second White House, given he visited that not only when he held positions, but he visited that with his family on many occasions during his life. And however, this great American who served us so well in the Second World War as a Supreme Commander, this man who was the first commander of NATO, this man who became probably the greatest Republican president post-Second World War, only once in 1959 was allowed to have an informal visit to the United Kingdom. He was never afforded a state reception. He was never afforded the right to address Parliament. And the American people and that president never complained once. he was able to engage informally. All we are saying is surely, if it was good enough for that great president who contributed so much to our society, who contributed so much to the defeat of fascism, that an informal visit was sufficient, why on earth are we rolling out a red carpet to a man who has only spread division and international instability? The first foreign leader to be invited to address this Parliament was the President of France on the 23rd of March 1939. So it was not as if there was not a precedent for having people to come on state visits or to speak to Parliament. And we know that only 2 American presidents in history have been afforded both a state visit and an invitation to address Parliament, Reagan and Obama. One other president was invited to address Parliament but not receive a state visit, in Bill Clinton. And one had a state visit, but was not invited to address Parliament, George W. Bush. But most American presidents, since the beginning of the 20th century, who have come to this country, have come on informal visits. It is unusual for us to accord a state visit or an ability to address Parliament to American presidents. And when we do so, I would say we should think very carefully. What is it that makes this president, who has created such international instability and creating such social division, what makes him deserving of a state visit? I would say nothing. It is a grubby and despicable manoeuvre by this Prime Minister. Many years ago, the Scottish poet Hugh MacDiarmid said that when he died, he wanted to have a 2-minute pandemonium. The only good thing I can see coming out of this state visit by President Trump is an opportunity for the citizens and parliamentarians of the nations of the United Kingdom to have a 2-minute pandemonium in opposition.
And May.
Mr Andrew Turner, I'll keep my remarks quite brief, and I'm disappointed that some of the honourable members that have been speaking for the motion to ban Mr President Trump are actually saying that anyone that would support the visit is an apologist for his views, and that is absolutely not the case. I actually thought that my honourable friend for South Suffolk, who said about the calm, reflective diplomacy, actually is exactly right. I don't think megaphone diplomacy is ever something to be advocated. I actually think we are best served by conducting our relationship with the United States in a positive manner. I cannot think, when you look at the response from the government, Mr Turner, to both of these petitions, that the response is the visit was offered on behalf of Her Majesty, the Queen. I can't think that the Queen is completely unaware of what's being offered in her name, and I would suspect that Her Majesty, this is way above my pay grade, and I've not actually had any idea of what Her Majesty thinks, because actually that is the whole point. We are not aware of what Her Majesty thinks. She does not pronounce, as convention decrees, her views. I cannot think Her Majesty will be embarrassed, because Her Majesty, as always, will be an absolute beacon of soft diplomacy by greeting the visitors to this country that are accorded in her name the rights of a visit. And I would find it quite surprising that honourable members who have, and I've made a list of them, but I did run out of the names, that who are against this visit, including the honourable member for Newport West, the honourable member for Tottenham, the honourable member for Cardiff South and Penarth, actually are arguing that 7 days is a short term. Well, I hope colleagues will indulge me when it's the old adage when arguing with a prostitute about the price, and she says when he's offering her twopence, what do you take me for? And he said, I think we know this is now a negotiating strategy. At what point would the honourable members opposite, oh, let's have some fake outrage here. I think everybody has heard this comment before. I am standing here as a woman being shouted down by women. Isn't that right? At what point opposite, in the 7 days, at what time would it be considered appropriate to extend the invitation. What we are actually talking about is a ban. Because from everything that has been said, there is no point that would seem to be acceptable to the honourable members who have spoken on this petition for banning. And I have listened absolutely courteously to all the honourable members that have spoken. I have sat here and not intervened because I'm mindful of time. So I'd appreciate not barracking from opposition members. My point is, if we are going to agree that the diplomacy to be extended between ourselves and the United States of America is within the gift of the Prime Minister, and I presume with the permission of Her Majesty, then it will be done in the best possible manner to further our relationship with our closest ally. And for this poking with a stick to stir up the bee's nest, I am absolutely amazed that honourable members opposite think this is the best way forward. The calm, reflective measures that were being talked about is exactly what we should be doing. And any of us that have particular concerns about some of the pronouncements of the President Trump have them, quite rightly so. I object completely to some of the things that have been said. But what I'm looking at is our government has extended in her name of Her Majesty an invitation for someone to come to our country as a welcomed ally and as a president who we shall hopefully have a good and purposeful relationship with. And so therefore, all these comments that we are now hearing about the man being a protozoa, we have no respect for other members of leaders of other countries if we talk about them in this manner. If we have concerns about his policies going forward, by all means, criticise them, raise concerns about them. But until that point, until we turn our back on the President of the United States of America, I believe we would be offering a state visit, and I think it is quite appropriate that we do so. The fact that our Prime Minister, through her diplomatic efforts, has secured a future for NATO, have secured a future direction for this country which binds us together as allies. Of course, my honourable friend.
I also get the impression that a number of people simply cannot come to terms with the fact that over 60 million people, 61 million plus, voted for the President of the United States, Donald Trump, because they felt left behind. And it's an inability of people in this House to come to terms with democracy. That's why Tony Blair was visiting TV and radio stations the other day, trying to reverse the democratic decision of the British people. It's the inability to understand what democracy is all about.
My honourable friend is right. And again, there have been plenty of comments here, but 63 million people, I'm reliably informed, it was nearly 63 million people, actually voted for President Trump. And that is their democratic decision. They are the people who have evaluated whether they like the man. They are the people that evaluated whether they think he's going to take the country forward. They are the people, many of whom were aware of some of his comments in the past, who actually voted for him because of the way he has taken the lines that he has. That is not for us to criticise and try and redress the matter now. I thought it was a ridiculous debate that we should somehow stand against his candidacy. He is the president. We must move on. And I actually think the most important thing, if we have our criticisms, we have our concerns, they are done behind closed doors. These public pronouncements seem to me to be completely counterintuitive to what we need to be doing for the future of this country. And my friend who spoke for Gainsborough got it exactly right. The easy argument is to stand in this chamber and make vast speeches about how some of his comments have been totally reprehensible, and they have been. But how much farther does that get us? How much farther does that get our country in the future for the trade deals, the negotiations, and maybe the reliance on them at some point in the future when they need to come to our aid? I suspect this is a very dangerous route to go down.
Mr. Daniel Seichner.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I just wanted to start by talking about the numbers of people who have signed this petition. It is a truly staggering number. In my constituency, almost 9,000, almost 1 in every 10 residents of Cambridge. And we've been hearing talk about democracy. I have to say, democracy does not equal majoritarianism, and it's very important to remember that. And I just want to say a little bit about why people in cities like Cambridge feel so passionately about this issue. Because they go to the very heart and kernel of people's beliefs about themselves. So we've heard about the people who've been left behind, but there's also another country that values tolerance, education, understanding, and learning. That's the kind of city Cambridge is. And there are other cities around the country just like that. So for many, many people, this is more than just a calculation of national interest. This is about who we are. It's about our values. really, really matters. So I'll quote one or two of the constituents who have not just signed the petition, but have written to me. One who said they were appalled at the recent travel ban imposed by President Trump, which denigrates Western values in such a public and devastating way. Now, we've heard the argument about we've had other unsavoury leaders here in the past, and of course, there are always those kind of trade-offs. And when we invite people here, we are trying to do something positive. We are trying to find common ground. The goal is always to widen dialogue. But the United States is so much better than President Trump. That's the key to this. And we've got a shared history. We go back historically. There's always been a tension between the old world and the new world. It's been a creative cultural tension over many, many years. But the fact that we are such good friends and have such shared values ought to mean that we are the ones who can candidly say to America in a troubled time, and it is a troubled time, to many, many people in America who are looking for something better, that we stand with them at this time. We stand with them. And frankly, as we speak, the Trump presidency has been disintegrating. It's been a near meltdown in the White House over the last month or two. And we shouldn't be coming along to help prop it up. Now, we've heard already about the Prime Minister's rush to go and meet President Trump, and we all understand why that was post-Brexit. We can all see the point. But one of my constituents describes that as an obsequious and inappropriate offer of cordiality. Now, I know that may not be the words that be chosen in every constituency, but it kind of sums up what a lot of people feel in Cambridge. And my view is that turning to such an unstable regime is really a big, big risk. A big risk. It may not look so bright in the months ahead. And is it really the patriotic option in our national self-interest? Are we really sure that this is the person we put our trust in? Now, we used to understand that by sharing sovereignty with others, we were all stronger. Well, now, if we're in this new world where it's everyone for themselves, America's a big, powerful country. If it's America first, where does that leave us exactly? So I think we should think clearly about that. Another constituent says, our relationship with the US is diminished by subordinating our long-held values for our short-term trading interests. The special relationship is only as special as the values which underpin it. Now, I understand the difficulty the Prime Minister has got herself into, but actually there are many ways out of this. Just the revelations about Trump's first choice for National Security Advisor and his potential link with the Russians should surely be more than enough good reason for us to think that enough is enough. If it's about UK national security and interests, then I say think again. And let me conclude, Mr. Turner, by saying, in my view, Mr. Trump is a disgusting, immoral man, and he represents the very opposite of the values that we hold. And he should not be welcome here. We're a tolerant country, but tolerance does not allow that tolerance to be abused. We do not welcome bigots, and we don't stand aside when we see intolerance, ignorance and hatred on the march. We respond, and that response should be for our government to withdraw the invitation.
Monaghan.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I'm a teacher by profession, and one of the most important things that a teacher can give to their pupils is a view of tolerance and respect, of understanding, of knowing that the world is made up of a whole variety of different people who are no better or worse than each other.
Hear, hear.
I became concerned when I heard comments like, grab them by the pussy. But I was even more concerned when these were dangerously dismissed as locker room talk.
Yep.
Now, unlike the member for Gainsborough, I do not know any men who think this, have these thoughts, or even discuss them in the locker room. But then again, I move in different circles to the member for Gainsborough. When Donald Trump was elected, I tweeted, xenophobic, racist, sectarian and sexist rhetoric has just been legitimised. We should all be very afraid. Fox News reported that our First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, had urged Trump to reach out to those who felt marginalised, a view that I think we would all agree with.
Hear, hear.
I will do.
Obviously, I appreciate that you are a trained teacher, but could I ask you to project a little more over the noise of the many, many people that are protesting outside against Trump?
Thank you. Thank my honourable friend for her intervention, and of course many of us may join them after this debate has. No, I won't. However, Fox News also quoted my tweet, and this opened the floodgates. Now, I have a whole pile of them. I'm not going to treat you to the whole selection, but I'll read a couple of brief ones. Mind your damn business and stay the hell out of our politics. The silent majority has spoken. We do not want to end up like your piss-poor country. We kicked your ass once, we can do it again if you give us a reason. And it goes on, but I won't read the whole thing. Here's another one. Keep your vulgar comments on your side of the pond. We should have let Germany run over you in the 1940s. But my personal favourite was from the geographically challenged Randy Crone from Dallas, who tweeted, "Ignorant, thick, foolish is the order of the day with Carol Monaghan. Australia should be very afraid." But regardless of why people voted the way they did, a Pandora's box of hate has been opened, and the right wing has become emboldened, both in the United States and across Europe. And this is something that we should all be worried about. Dark rhetoric that should never be uttered is now being freely expressed. What do teachers now tell their classes? How do they teach them tolerance and respect when not only has Trump been elected, but he has been offered a state visit? How can teachers defend tolerance? How can they stand up to their pupils? How can they tackle bullying, xenophobia and homophobia in schools when we've rolled out the red carpet to him? I've heard a number of people talking about it's in the national interest. Well, I'll tell you what's in the national interest. Showing an example to our young people. Telling our young people that these views are not to be accepted, they're not to be tolerated, and we should be defending those who have moderate views and moderate positions. I stand here in support of the 3,554 of my constituents who have signed the petition, and many, many others who emailed me, urging me to speak out against this state visit. And yes, I will.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. We share a boundary. 5,259 of my constituents have signed the petition against the state visit, compared to 168 who signed the petition in favour. Given the vast level of public interest in this petition, the interest that we can hear from outside, the interest that's been displayed by the number of members wanting to contribute this evening, does she agree with me that the Petitions Committee and the Procedure Committee need to look at ways of extending the time and perhaps even the space that's available for this kind of debate in the future?
Absolutely. I thank my honourable friend for that intervention. Of course, one of the things I said as soon as we arrived this afternoon for this debate was, why was this not in the main chamber? Obviously, so many members are wanting to speak today, and I'm sure the main chamber is a lot less busy than it is here this afternoon. So just to conclude, I agree with my constituents, with the overwhelming view of my constituents. This state visit should not go ahead in the national interest.
Hear, hear. Speaker is Mr. Alistair Carmichael, but before he speaks, could we cut it down to 4 minutes?
It's a pleasure to take part in this debate and to serve under your chairmanship. I congratulate the Petitions Committee for bringing it to us this afternoon, and indeed in particular I congratulate all those who set up and signed these petitions. I think for them to see a direct influence of that political activism on the business of this House has got to be a good and positive development. The argument brought forward by those who support the extension of an invitation of this sort to President Trump, as I understood it to be most thoughtfully expressed by the Chairman of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, is essentially this is a spending of a measure of political capital, for which there is to be a return. As the Chairman of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee put it, the Prime Minister won an important reaffirmation of the special relationship. Now, I have to say to those and all those who have advanced that argument, where is the evidence that that is in fact the case? Because in fact, having offered President Trump a state visit, the offer having been accepted, we've since seen a very different range of views coming from him, which are not particularly helpful, particularly in relation to America's future engagement through NATO, the relationship with Russia, for example. Certainly.
The honourable gentleman is making a very important point, and does he not recall indeed another British Prime Minister, one I think did many, many good things, but I think was deeply naive in the ability he thought he had to influence an American president, and where that led us?
Well, indeed, and I had cause to reflect this weekend in relation to that particular former Prime Minister. Indeed. My other concern, though, is that we may have spent this capital in this way, and it may or may not ultimately be effective, but this is week one of a 4-year term. And what, having offered a state visit this time, are we going to offer the next time we want to get a favourable response? Will it be the crown jewels? Who knows? Just about anything is possible these days. Essentially, what we are here talking about is a question of judgment. And in my view, the Prime Minister, in the exercise for judgment, got it catastrophically wrong. Not just to offer a state visit, but as others have observed, to do it 7 days after his inauguration. Now, this was not something that she just decided on the spur of the moment. We all know the Prime Minister well enough to know that this is not something she would have blurted out to fill an awkward pause in the conversation. So the question is, what was the motivation for this? My personal suspicion is that she was perhaps a little bit spooked by seeing the pictures of Nigel Farage in Trump Towers following the election in November, or it may be, as the Right Honourable Member Gordon suggested, trying to pursue questions of trade deals post-Brexit. Whatever the motivation, however, it has left us looking desperate and craven and rushing to embrace a presidency when the rest of the world is rushing away from it. It's also worth remembering some of the things that that presidency involves, in particular, my own personal concern, his determination or his avowed intention to resurrect the use of torture. I'm sorry, but I'm down to 4 minutes and I don't have any more injury time, as it's called. You know, waterboarding or something a hell of a lot worse was the expression. When I asked the Foreign Secretary about whether he had raised that with him, he said that he didn't discuss operational matters. It is not an operational matter whether we share our intelligence with a country that condones the use of torture. That is a matter of policy for every other country in the world, and it should be a matter of policy for the United States of America as well. I have no issue with the Prime Minister seeking to influence the President of the United States, but she should be doing that in a way that engages the relationship that we have enjoyed in the past. She should be seeking to build on that, and if and only if she is then successful in that, should an offer such as the one which she has made be extended. This presumes, of course, that President Trump will be influenced. I see little evidence to support that contention. Even those few benign influences that are around him do not seem able to do that. I start from the position, Mr. Turner, as somebody who values the special relationship, but I understand that that special relationship is not between a government and an administration. It is between our two peoples. That is why it is our shared history, our shared values, that it makes it special and enduring, and that, in fact, is what the Prime Minister risks doing severe damage to today.
Hope that this debate, and I don't just mean the debate in Westminster Hall, but the wider debate would be conducted in a calm and rational fashion. And while I express that hope, I suppose the past hour and 40 minutes would indicate that maybe a hope rather than an expectation. But nonetheless, it has been debated widely outside, and there are many outside who don't share my view. My view is that candidate Trump and Mr. Trump made some deplorable and vile comments which are indefensible cannot be defended morally, politically, or in any other way. But he is the president, the democratically elected president of the United States of America. As far as I'm aware, 62.9 million people voted for the now President Trump, and the Electoral College system delivered him the presidency. But, Mr. Turner, this is the point I wish to labour on in the couple of minutes that I have. We had 8 years ago the election of the then President Barack Obama. We were told at that time that here was a new man. Here was a man whose slogan was, "Yes, we can," who was going to introduce a radical wave of liberal ideas that would bring the United States of America well into the 21st century and would liberate and emancipate that nation state of the great liberty that it has had for over 200 years. And after 8 years of his presidency, according to some, over 60 million Americans, after having 8 years of Obama's presidency, elected a bigoted, misogynistic, racist, paranoid, xenophobe, Islamophobe. How did they do that after 8 years of the great liberal being in charge of the United States of America? How could otherwise rational, peaceful Democrats vote for such a xenophobe? It is, in part to what the honourable member alluded to, across the free world, Mr. Turner, there is an isolation, not an isolationism of President Trump, but an isolation of peoples, whether it is in the United Kingdom, whether it is in the USA, and we will probably see in the Netherlands, in France, and in Germany. The rising of people who have had enough of the establishment, because it is the establishment that they blame for their plight. And it does not do for people to patronise them and say, well, we will take account of your fears and concerns, and that you have perceptions. They're not really accurate, but we understand they are perceptions. That won't wash. It didn't wash in America. It didn't wash with the Brexit vote. And we will wait and see whether it washes in much of continental Europe. It is time the establishment, the bubble, whether in Westminster, whether in Brussels, whether in Washington, woke up to the reality that people want to see and hear their government, their elected representatives, representing them, rather than simply going through the motions of establishing further bubbles and retreating into their bubble even more so. So, Mr. Turner, I do not endorse some of the things President Trump said. He has been invited. We should ensure that that invite goes ahead. And we should also say to Mr. Trump, some of the things you have said are unacceptable. And if you think the pendulum has swung too far to the left, please, Mr. Trump, be sure and do not allow it to swing too far to the right.
And I want to congratulate the Procedures Committee for having this debate. My constituency, Brent Central, is the most diverse constituency in Europe, and for that I am very, very proud. And almost everybody has something to say about Trump and America. And the thing is this, Mr. Turner, that the UK has and always has had a close working relationship with the United States, and it's important to continue that special relationship. But that special relationship comes with responsibilities. And we today speak in our Parliament, which is older than the United States itself, and we have a responsibility as the elder, if you like, to guide that special relationship. It is often said that when America sneezes, the UK catches a cold. Well, right now, America has a pretty nasty virus, and it's important that that virus doesn't spread. And we have to stop that spread of that virus, because the closeness of our special relationship and the open wound that we have that was created by Brexit leaves us quite vulnerable. And we need to stop this contagion from becoming an epidemic that leads to a pandemic from which the free world may never recover. And there's lots of talk about the negotiations that the Prime Minister did and delivered to be able to deliver to continue this close working relationship? Well, I say this, that we cannot sell our souls and what we believe in order to be able to sell our goods and services. It's a price way too high to pay. And the antidote to this virus is building bridges, not walls. The antidote to this virus is listening to the thousands of people who have spoken, who've signed this petition, who are outside Parliament right now, that we can hear cheering and chanting. We hear people, they've come out to march. People who've never marched before are outside Parliament right now because they believe in something. They believe in hope, not hate. And Edmund Burke said that all that is necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. I'm sure, Mr. Turner, that he wanted to mention women in his speech, and that is a very wise statement. And it was women who were the first to mobilize against Trump's extremism. Hundreds and thousands took to the streets, and they were joined quite rightly by men, boys, girls, gay, straight, people of all religion and none. And it's time that the United Kingdom needs to be united in its voice against racism, bigotry, misogynist, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, and all the tools of division that has given Trump the White House. And people have said today that he's not racist because, to me, that's the same as saying, you know, how can he be a murderer? Well, it's the same way a murderer can be a murderer and still have friends who are alive. Do you mean it doesn't matter? He's still a racist and misogynistic anyway. We affect each other. And the thing is that Martin Luther King, I think, put it quite well. He said, I cannot be what I ought to be until you are where you ought to be. That is the interrelated structure of reality. We are bound together by a single garment of destiny, and we need each other in order to move forward. And so there's no way around it. We have to work with other people. So it's fine. You know, President Trump, he is the president. He can come and visit, but not a state visit. That's taken it a little step too far. Because Trump's message isn't about togetherness. If you know, it's all about building walls and imposing bans. It's not about the truth. When he speaks and you criticize or you question what he said, he cries that it's fake news. There is a real issue and a problem that we have to address.
Reached the time at 18:45, so I'm afraid we must move on to Liam Burns.
I'll conclude to give my honourable friend some time to speak as well. I'd just like to say that the whole world is watching, and the whole world is watching the decisions that we make in Parliament, and we cannot be on the wrong side of history. Thank you very much.
Mr. Turner, thank you very much. It's a privilege to serve under your chairmanship. And I want to start in the same place that my right honourable friend, the member for Tottenham, started, which is as someone who loves America very dearly. I'm very proud to be one of the Fulbright scholars in this place. I spent 2 very happy years living in America. I crisscrossed the country in that time, and it was there that I learned about America's warmth, its beauty, its enterprise, its energy, its creativity, its generosity, and its resolution in the face of adversity. These are all of the values that we expect a President of the United States to epitomise. These were the values of President Washington, whose birthday we mark today on President's Day. It was once said that President Washington could not tell a lie. This president appears to find it difficult telling the truth. And what we need right now, in this world of division and discord that we face, is a shared defence of the values that we have in common. We need a shared stand against disunity, a shared stand against intolerance, a shared stand against hatred. And that is what we should be celebrating with a presidential state visit to the United Kingdom. And that, I'm afraid, is what we are not going to get. Now, my fear is that this visit will not be a showcase for those shared values. Actually, it will be a showcase for the divisions between us. We have to ask ourselves, what is going to greet President Trump when he gets there? I would argue that what we are going to get, frankly, is the kind of protest we see outside. In fact, what will greet the president will make the protests outside look like a tea party. What we hope will be a special relationship will emerge as a strained relationship. Now, if I thought, like my honourable friend, the member Mann, then I would be all for rolling out the red carpet.
But I think what the President has shown us by his conduct is that he is not a man who treasures two-way conversations. He is a man who treasures one-way conversations, ideally composed of 140 characters. Now, some honourable members said that we have entertained all sorts. That is true. We have entertained all sorts. Diplomacy is not a business where you can simply conduct conversations with your friends. But as my honourable friend, the member for Cambridge, said, we hold America to a higher standard because they are our friends. It was those shared values that we pioneered in this Parliament in the years before the Civil War. It was those shared values that we gave to the Pilgrim Fathers, who took them and wrote the Mayflower Compact, which became the American Constitution. Those are the values that we should be celebrating. I won't give way because time is now very short. My fear is that in this visit, nothing would be left unsaid. Now, this is a problem because, as is sometimes said, in diplomacy, sometimes things are better left unsaid. Well, in this visit, nothing will be left unsaid. We would hear the sirens, we would hear the protests, and my fear is that in parts of America, that would be misinterpreted, not as antipathy to Donald Trump, but antipathy to America. That is not something that we want to strengthen and reinforce the American special relationship. Now, the truth is that the history of British diplomacy, the history of British political history, is littered by British prime ministers who overestimate their influence with American presidents. I fear our Prime Minister is about to add her name to the cast list. So I think that this state visit was a mistake. I think it is hard to withdraw the offer right now. I think, quite frankly, our best hope is that we keep it short, because my fear is it will not be sweet.
It's full to Tazmina Ahmed Sheikh.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Turner. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairpersonship. Can I start by asking members who are still here this evening just to close their eyes even and just think for 1 minute, if we were talking about any other person, any other leader in the world, wherever they might come from, would we be standing in such astute defence of him? I think perhaps not. And we should all think about what that says about us. Does it say that it doesn't matter what the President of the United States of America says because he's a rich white man? I fear that that's exactly what it says. We've had a talk of others who've been invited on state visits to this country, but I would ask those who've raised that issue, which other head of state that's been invited on a state visit has posed a threat to our national security and has insulted a member of the royal family? I think the answer to that is none. We also heard from I'm actually not going to give way because it's not fair to everybody else. In relation to comments made by the member for New Forest East, when he spoke of the path of righteousness, a very noble path indeed that is. I do fear that we have been here before. And many of us who are here in this debate, including the honourable member for Bradford West, who spoke about inviting, then he wasn't even a candidate for the Republican Party, over to have a look and see how we live in this country, how we have a tolerant society, which we're extremely proud. If anyone really thinks that will make much of a difference at all, I really do comment on their innocence in this matter. Moving on to the comment that was made about Trump being refreshing. Now, I can understand why the benches opposite find it refreshing when an elected leader does actually do what they say they're going to do during their election campaign. They're certainly unfamiliar with the concept. But I do say, in relation to this issue, I find it rather abhorrent use of the word refreshing indeed. And I suppose that takes me on to the comment made by the member for Gainsborough, when he said, which one of us hasn't made a ridiculous sexual comment in the past? That, Mr. Turner, is unacceptable. It's unacceptable even that the member even thinks it's the right thing to bring into this forum. It is never, ever okay to make comments of a sexual nature to anybody. And I know I speak for all of the women in this House, if not some of the men too, when we say the women in this House have had enough of it, and we're certainly not going to put up with any more of it in this chamber. State visits have been an honour bestowed by our monarchy on the heads of states of other nations. And this debate is not about how the USA voted. Of course it's not. We know there were democratic elections, although indeed it is President Trump that's cast aspersions upon whether some of the people who voted had the right to do so. But what this is about, Mr. Chair, is who we are as a country made up of 4 nations. And I have to say, I think the voices outside are perhaps more demonstrative of who we are as a country of many nations than some of the voices we've heard in here today. And I believe, yes, I will.
I think my honourable friend is making a very important point, that we respect the right of the Americans to decide their own president. But that is not what this debate is about. It's about our values, our constituents, and what it means to us. And if this Parliament is the embodiment of our values in this country, to paraphrase Jane Austen, are the shades of Parliament to be thus polluted?
I agree very much with my honourable friend, and to signs from the back because I allowed an intervention from my honourable friend. That's because my honourable friend hasn't yet spoken in this debate, and I think it's important that everybody's voices are heard, not just those of the majority of the men. Well, I'll take an intervention then. Yes, I didn't realise. Please.
I'm extremely grateful, and the honourable lady is making a very powerful message, but I'd just like to take her back to points about other heads of states, because I'm a little bit confused. Many members here have mentioned some rather unsavoury figures who've been afforded state visits. You know, not so long ago, we rolled out the red carpet for the Emir of Kuwait. This is a place where, you know, if you're gay, there's a pretty good chance you'll be slung in prison for being a homosexual. And I just wonder whether she thinks we are traipsing into an area of double standards here.
I'm very grateful to the honourable member for his intervention. I say I don't get any extra time for taking interventions, and say that I believe where it's in our national interest, the governments of Scotland and the UK should seek to work constructively with governments and world leaders with whom we both agree and disagree. But I do refer them to my point where I said about what is in the interests of our national security and what insults have been made to the royal family, which I'll come to, if I can, in my speech. We must demonstrate leadership. The point in all that we do is to encourage others who visit this country to raise their game. But the current President of the United States is not someone who's demonstrating positive leadership on the world stage, or someone who would benefit from a first-hand examination of democracy, and he's not acting in a way in which is in our national interest. Up to now, Presidents of the United States have been almost universally considered to be leaders of the free world. We've had some good presidents and some not so good presidents, but I respect that while I may agree with some of their philosophies or policies, each has been committed to upholding the Constitution of the United States and promoting and protecting freedom and justice across the world. And I consider myself a friend of the United States, and like many Scots, I'm pleased of our country's strong links. As an alumni of the US State Department IVLP programme, I've seen firsthand the professionalism and care with which US administrations deal with their friends from across the world when they visit. But President Trump does not follow in the footsteps of the giants of American history. His actions to date have not upheld US values and the US constitutions. They have simply undermined them to every extent. And it's not just by inviting him here on a state visit we're setting aside his outrageous and deplorable personal conduct. This is a man, as we've heard, who jokes about grabbing women by the pussy. This is a man who, I hear groans from the back, it's just not on. This is a man who said that of the Duchess of Cambridge in 2012, who wouldn't take Kate's picture and make lots of money if she does the nude sunbathing thing? Come on, Kate. How humiliating it would be for any family to welcome somebody like that in their home. And we're asking that the royal family do precisely that. So I object to this proposed state visit, not just because of his vile behaviour, but also because of his actions as president. He signed illegal and unconstitutional executive orders which contravene the USA's obligations under the Geneva Convention. His subsequent public statements have systematically undermined the independence of the judiciary. He set the groundwork for rolling back the Voting Rights Act and placing new restrictions on the rights of Americans to vote by falsely claiming voting fraud is taking place on a massive scale without a single shred of evidence to substantiate this. He's undermined the free press. He's called any poll which shows the US public is at odds with his policy position fake news. In fact, he's now extended that to very fake news. He speaks of the press being the enemy of the American people, and he's publicly endorsed the use of war crimes by US forces abroad. He would deliberately target innocent civilians in direct contravention to international law. His actions are morally and legally wrong and in conflict with our own international interests. And don't take my word for it. Following the issuing of the executive order banning entry to the US of those born from a number of predominantly Muslim countries, the Home Secretary said during questioning, the sources of terrorism are not to be found in the sources where the President is necessarily looking for them. Trump isn't combating terrorism, he's bolstering terrorism. He's adopting a warped worldview which will in itself give aid to terrorists. He says it's Islam against the West, and that feeds into the narrative of Daesh, who say it's the West against Islam. What a dangerous path to take us down. And as we saw during last week's, what can only be described as extraordinary press conference, which achieved its main aim of deflecting immediate attention from the mounting evidence of links with Putin's Russia, he's either a complete idiot who believes everything he reads on the internet or an enormous liar. I don't think he's actually an idiot. He's been phenomenally successful in achieving his goals. He has a plan and a means to carry it out. And I want to join my friends in the US in defending their constitution. Have we spared a thought that this isn't just about government to government? This is about people of the United States of America who themselves have protested against the actions of their president. Women, men, women and children alike who stood beside refugees when the Muslim ban was put in place. Who's going to speak for them? I think we should too. So if we fate and accommodate Trump on an official visit, lending him our cloak of respectability and hoping that this acquiescence will change his dangerous policies or vile behaviour, we'll be carrying on in the tradition of the spectacularly unsuccessful tactics of those Tory MPs in this very chamber who attended the debate a year ago and dismissed him as a wazak, I think was the word that was used. Those that chose previously to ridicule them must be wondering why they did that then. We now, as we've heard so often from the Prime Minister, are supposed to be demonstrating global leadership. In our actions, we've demonstrated nothing other than we have failed in our duty to do that. We are indeed following in his footsteps, and I don't intend to go in that direction.
Thank you, Mr. Turner, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity to speak in this debate, not least because I think my constituency, Hornsey and Wood Green, has the third highest number of signatures on the petition. So it's a happy coincidence that I've had the opportunity to respond on behalf of the opposition. Mr. Turner, we know the petition is approaching the 2 million mark, and we know from the hundreds of letters that we've received in our offices and from the thousands that joined in when myself and the member for Brent Central went on the public protest earlier this month, that there is immense public concern, and not only about the behaviour and the confrontational nature of the President's approach, but also the position that our own government has taken in relation to the President's visit. The Right Honourable Member for Newport West gave some excellent examples in his opening contribution, and so many members have made passionate speeches this evening. We know so well from what the member for Tottenham said that the United States is one of our closest allies and strongest trading partners, although I would hasten to add that they weren't the only partners in the world wars which were fought. There were some other very important partners from the Commonwealth countries, and we mustn't forget our history. It's very important. But the member for Tottenham did point out that the importance really is about the relationships, and it was great to hear the member also from Birmingham speaking about his experience of studying in the US, because there's nothing like an experience at university to really hammer home that sense of friendship. Now we have, of course.
Forgiving me. Does she agree with me on that point? Also, the staff that work at places like the American State Department, in their consulates, in their embassies. I spent 18 months working for the American consulate in Edinburgh, and I was with them on the evening of the election, and I can say how devastated they were at the thought that President Trump was being elected. They are now at the forefront of having to face down the public and work with the public when he is making such abhorrent statements.
I thank the member for that intervention, and I did rather feel a sense of sympathy for the woman who was quite unceremoniously sacked following the imposition of the ban. And having run a local authority myself, I know how heated elected members can get and decide
to run into the chamber or the White House and suddenly decide this is the policy of the day, and the poor old staff have to respond and think up how this policy can actually come into effect. And that's why I suppose certain states have actually led to question the actual legal basis for the famous and so-called Muslim ban. Just to comment briefly, Mr. Turner, on the issues that we should be talking about today around tackling international crime and terrorism, working together to address the mass movement of people across the globe, and the reinforcing international policies to combat climate change. Sadly, instead, we're somehow falling into the trap of responding confrontationally to somehow making policy pronouncements by Twitter. And I do hope that we can sort of right the ship again and get back to our more measured way of discussing, debating, and taking a little more time to consider the importance of our foreign policy. Turning briefly to the language of the petition, one concern outlined in the text of the petition focuses on the potential embarrassment a state visit may cause to Her Majesty. However, I fear there is a greater concern that proceeding with the organisation of a state visit, whilst President Trump remains intent upon enforcing his travel ban on nationals from Iraq, Syria, Iran, Somalia, Sudan and Yemen, would send the wrong message to the White House right now when we're trying to establish a relationship of equals. The international community, and indeed the sizable diasporas from the aforementioned countries, do reside here in our constituencies. But let's be in no doubt, it's not just about the fact that one group's been singled out, it's the fact that any group at all has been singled out, because it's the nature of that discrimination, which is so random, that really strikes fear into the hearts of so many. We know that the German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, took President to task on the travel ban and how it amounted to a breach of the Refugee Convention. And I think many would expect the same of the Prime Minister of the UK. And as such, I share the disappointment of hundreds of thousands of citizens who felt totally let down by the lack of robust leadership, not least because it sends a worrying message that our foreign policy is overwhelmingly focused and determined by trade. I'd welcome a commitment from the Minister that we have a more rounded foreign policy, not just trade, but the importance of human rights and the importance of national security. Presidents of the United States have often made official visits that many have mentioned in the debate today. Maybe they've come for summit meetings or other events within months of their inauguration. However, as has been made so clear today, state visits do require an invitation and historically have taken place over a considerably longer period following the inauguration than the one currently proposed for President Trump. And I thought the member for Rhondda made a very important point that perhaps in a more considered approach, we could ask that one of our committees review our approach to state visits. That would also, I think, protect a Prime Minister who perhaps caught on the hop abroad could say that there was a system of going through something whereby Parliament, she could be protected by Parliament in that way rather than perhaps setting out in what was rather an unfortunate and risky endeavour. Little was she in the air and suddenly the ban had been announced. And she was really caught in a position where she had to respond so quickly to that. Whereas had she been able to say, due process, we have a process for deciding these things, and this is, we will let you know, I think that would have been a much more diplomatic, considered and sensible approach. So I do hope that the Minister will comment on the member for Rhondda's suggestion. As the member for Hampstead and Kilburn pointed out, the Prime Minister announced the invitation just a week after he took office. So perhaps a little more thought on the timing of it would have been much more helpful and would perhaps have led to less concern by our own citizens who we can hear outside tonight. The member for Bethnal Green and Bow and the member for Dewsbury have also pointed out quite eloquently the importance of our values around women's rights. And indeed, the member for Bradford West talking about her own constituency, where clearly messages around misogyny and racism were so unwelcome. So to sum up, Mr. Turner, we do share the concern of so many parliamentary colleagues and indeed millions of people across the UK over both the timing and the context in which the invitation for this state visit was issued. And I'd be keen to know whether the Minister himself, who we all know is an honourable man, had any personal discussions with the Foreign Secretary or indeed the Prime Minister over the timing of the invitation, the designation of the visit as a state visit, given that he himself believes the rhetoric around this travel ban unacceptably anti-Muslim, and I quote him. Secondly, I'd like to give the Minister the opportunity to admit that extending the honour of state visit in the current context was an error of judgment in essence. To conclude, the position is clear. We are opposed to Mr. Trump being honoured with a state visit so early in his presidency, and certainly whilst he remains intent on enforcing this discriminatory travel ban. And should it go ahead, I'm strongly opposed to offering him the honour of addressing both Houses of Parliament in Westminster Hall so early. At this point, I would like to associate myself with the remarks of the Speaker of the House of Commons, and indeed the sentiments of the early day motion 890, tabled by my excellent honourable friend, the member for Cardiff South and Penrith. I have one more sentence, Mr.
In that case, please
I'm immensely proud that members today have reaffirmed Parliament's strong role and commitments to the principles of the rule of law and the independence of the judiciary, as well as our opposition to racism and sexism. Thank you, Mr. Turner.
Well, thank you, Mr. Turner, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And in response to the two petitions which have triggered this debate, and having listened to the arguments on both sides, I'd like to set out the position of Her Majesty's government and explain the thinking behind it. The state visit, as people have mentioned today, is a uniquely British construct. No other country is able to offer a state visit in quite the same way as we do. It is distinctively British. And over the course of her reign, Her Majesty has hosted over 100 of them. All such visits are a rare and prestigious occasion, but they are also our most important diplomatic tool. They enable us to strengthen and influence those international relationships that are of the greatest strategic importance to this country and even more widely to other parts of the world as well. And in answer to the Honourable Lady who speaks for the front bench for the opposition, recommendations for state visits are made on the advice of the government through the Royal Visits Committee, not by Parliament as such. That committee is attended by representatives of the Royal Household, Downing Street, the Cabinet Office, the Department for Trade, and is chaired by the Foreign Office. Mr. Turner, in an uncertain and increasingly dangerous world, the ability to work closely with key countries is of critical importance. Strong alliances and close relationships are a central stabilizing pillar for world security. And this is an increasingly unstable world. Yet always within that world and throughout modern history, the United States and the United Kingdom have worked together side by side to bring peace and security during times of danger and uncertainty. And especially with the world as it is today, that's why a state visit matters so much, because put simply, diplomacy matters. The relationship between the United Kingdom and the United States is built around a common language, the common principles of freedom and democracy, and common interests in so many other areas besides. And our relationship is undoubtedly special. On security, on defence, on trade, on investment, on all of these issues, the United Kingdom and the United States are and will remain the closest of partners. Now, the United States is the world's greatest power. And in the light of America's absolutely pivotal role, we believe it's entirely right that we should use all the tools at our disposal to build common ground with President Trump. Now, as the baton of office passed seamlessly, constitutionally, from one president to another, we were already well placed to have a productive and meaningful engagement with the new administration. The British Embassy in Washington has been working with key administration figures for many months. British Secretaries of State have built relationships with their opposite numbers following their congressional confirmation process. And the Prime Minister's visit last month was of enormous significance. Indeed, also, the Foreign and Defence Secretaries have met their opposite numbers, indeed only last week, and on Friday I met Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly. And this engagement places our national interest at the heart of our government's decision-making. And the special relationship is a central part of that national interest. It's a relation... No, I'm going to keep going. It's a relationship which transcends political parties on both sides of the Atlantic. And it is bigger than individual personalities. It's about the security and the prosperity of our two nations. Mr. Turner, the Prime Minister's meeting with President Trump in Washington last month identified many areas of common interest where we'll work with the new administration. And a state visit will provide the opportunity to advance these common interests further. In respect of timing, which has been mentioned in this debate, state visits are not necessarily the sole preserve of long-serving heads of state. In the past, a state visit has been extended to the presidents of South Africa, France, South Korea, Finland and Poland, amongst others, each within their first year of office. And the government, I'll just give way this once, otherwise I won't be able to answer all the points.
I thank the Minister for giving way, but would he not agree with this point at least, that to extend a state visit in this way and at this time could be seen, and has been seen by many of my constituents, as effectively a validation of the views and the statements of President Trump? And in that way, they feel very, very concerned about the message that it sends.
I understand exactly what the Honourable Lady has said and accept that that is the strong and perfectly powerful counter-argument to the case that I am making. But I do not accept that the process of a state visit will indeed be seen as such validation. And I'd like just to explain a bit further what I think the value of this state visit will entail. Because, Mr. Turner, the government strongly believes that it's a perfectly legitimate decision to use the full impact of an invitation to maximise the diplomatic significance of a state visit at the start of President Trump's term of office. Both President Obama and President George W. Bush visited the UK on a state visit during their first term in office, so it's entirely appropriate that President Trump should be invited in his first term too. But let me also be clear, because this has also been raised today, neither the precise timing nor the content of the proposed visit have yet been agreed. Now, mention has been made of the prospect of the President addressing Parliament in some manner or other. The fact is, on only 3 occasions in the past century has the guest addressed both Houses of Parliament as part of their state visit. President de Gaulle in 1960, President Mandela in 1996, and President Obama in 2011. But in any event, Mr. Turner, as the House and you are both aware, whether this ever happens is an issue solely for the relevant parliamentary authorities to determine.
There's tens of thousands of people demonstrating outside. I'm having difficulty hearing the Minister.
No, you're not.
But did the Minister just tell us
no,
that
that's
if he'd been asked, he'd been asked if he would have advised a visit within...
That is
it's
not
for the Minister.
That is not an order. That is not eligible. Sit down. Sit down. Go, Alan Well.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. So I would continue in talking about the prospect of anyone talking to both Houses of Parliament to say that comment on whether or not this might happen has on this occasion run completely ahead of itself, because the simple fact is that no request has ever been received from Washington for any parliamentary event to take place, and the question of perhaps addressing a meeting of Parliament has never even been mentioned. Therefore, Mr. Turner, any discussion or judgment about this possibility is purely speculative. But within the views that have been expressed about the appropriateness of a state visit for the President, there lurks too, I would argue, a fundamental principle that members of this House should consider very seriously, and it is the principle of freedom of speech. President Trump was democratically elected by the American people under their own constitutional system. To have strong views about him is one matter, but to translate a difference of opinion into a demand to ban him is quite another. And given the understandable questions on certain policy stances which arise with any change of government, it's prudent for us to work closely alongside the United States as the new administration charts its course. And already, We see the importance of that engagement with the Prime Minister's early meeting with the President, eliciting key commitments on NATO, echoed by the Vice President in Munich on Saturday, and laying the groundwork to establish a swift post-Brexit free trade agreement. And Mr. Turner, further constructive engagement will be helped by a state visit. Mr. Turner, in February 1917, a century ago, The Spectator magazine published its view on the United States and the UK. It read, "It would be easy to write down 100 reasons why unclouded friendship and moral cooperation between the United States and Britain are a benefit to the world, and why an interruption of such relations is a detriment to progress and a disease worldwide in its effects." I'm in the middle of a quote. It went on. But when we'd written down all those reasons, we should not have expressed the instinctive sentiments which go below and beyond them all. To our way of feeling, quarrelling and misunderstandings between the British and American peoples are like a thing contrary to nature. They're so contrary to nature, it went on, that the times of misunderstanding have always seemed to us abnormal, and a return to friendship not an achievement of wise diplomacy, but merely a resumption of the normal. It is that historic normality that is reflected in this invitation. This is a special moment for the special relationship. Mr. Turner, the visit should happen, the visit will happen, and when it does, I trust the United Kingdom will extend a polite and generous welcome to President Donald Trump.
Paul Flynn.
Extraordinary event, and the Petitions Committee and the system petitions here has come of age in this debate. How can we have such a situation where the Minister has given his carefully manicured press a civil service briefing, when outside we have a Greek chorus of disapproval in his case, but we are expressing the voice of the people, and a thunderous voice it's been. Just one point I'd like to make is that I believe the debate went off the rails at some point when a number of members suggested that petitioners were asking for a ban on President Trump. Not one of them are. Not one of the 2 million people are asking for a ban. They're in the large petition, they're asking for it to be downgraded from a state visit here. And that's the whole point, that by giving this rare accolade of a state visit to President Trump, the implication is that we approve of him and his policies. It's fine to have the president here, it's fine to have a visit on business, there's no objection to that. But this committee today has proved by this marvellous debate that we've had, that we are reacting to the voice of the people, to the anger and fear that's outside, and it's a good day for Parliament.
The question is that this House has considered e-petition 171828 and 178844 relating to a state visit by President Donald Trump. As many as are of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. No! I think the noes have it. The noes have it. Order, order.
Grand Committee Room Ident.